Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/241, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody on the podcast. Hello, everybody in the chat room and on YouTube. We are live, baby, live for episode number 241 of the Pedal Shift Project. My name is Tim Mooney. Thank you all so much for joining. I am very excited as I talk to the folks in the room in the live show at the top of all of this. It's been a minute since I've done a live show, and I think that now that I've gotten my second vaccination, as I revealed on the last episode of the pod, I'm starting to feel like, okay, let's start to slowly add things back to where they were before, and that includes doing live shows and doing more bike tours and start planning things and everything. So, if you too have had your second vaccination, awesome. If you are planning on getting it, awesome. If you are still waiting for it, I hope you are able to get it soon. And I already talked about it if you need convincing on the last episode, so I will not reiterate that if you still need some convincing about getting this this wonderful thing that science has given us. So, on this episode of the pod, we are going to do a very brief update on the micro camper build and how that relates to bicycle touring. We are also going to talk about my summer touring options because, man, that's just coming fast. Pretty soon, this summer is going to be upon us, and I got to start planning. I got to get things together. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what my options are and maybe a little bit of my struggles with all of that. Last but not least, we're going to close out the show with an Ask Me Anything segment. So folks in the live chat room will have first dibs, but I also have some emails from those of you who listen to the show, and we will answer some of your questions about bike touring. Lots of very interesting things going on in the world of bike touring, and I will do my best to give you actual answers to these things. So, I am going to move a few windows around to make sure everything is good. My connection is excellent according to YouTube. I don't know what that means, but I guess it means it is excellent. So let's get started by talking about the update on the micro camper situation, the LaCrosse, the 2011 Buick LaCrosse that is sitting literally mere feet away from where I'm sitting right now. First of all, I wanted to say thank you all for the support that you've given for this project. And it's really more emotional support, quite frankly. And there's actually been a couple of folks have given some good ideas on things. Unfortunately, many of those ideas were already too late to implement, but I think that they're very helpful for me as part of the learning process in all of this. If it wasn't really manifestly clear from before, it is very clear to me now that this is a test. I am learning so much about these types of things. You can watch dozens or nay, I say hundreds of hours of van building videos and feel like you have a decent idea of what you're doing. And then when you're sitting there with a miter box saw, which I only recently learned the name of, even though I've owned it for over 10 years, you start to learn pretty quickly that what you don't know, and what I don't know can pretty much fill the Grand Freaking Canyon. That's all I have to say about that. I want to talk about what has worked so far with this and other things, maybe things that don't work so well. But let's start talking about what works. I would say that generally the experiment, the general idea of this is what works. Once I removed the seats and all of that and realized that there's plenty of space in there, I think that the takeaway from where I'm at right now is that this is going to be functional in some type of way. Will it be something that is functional in a way that is, a 10 out of 10 or more like a 3 out of 10? That's going to be to be determined. I do think that there's a few things that I am going to have to fix as we go along here. And that's why lying down in it and kind of figuring out how this thing will all look and work and feel is a really important thing before we actually go off and do 6 weeks on the road with this thing. So we actually have a little bit of a shakedown that we're going to be doing starting next week. Just the drive part really more than anything else. But, with the dogs in there and everything, I think it'll be an interesting way to kind of just see how things are going. I do want to start by talking about the mattress situation. As a bit of review, and for those of you who are here in the live show version on YouTube, or if you're after the fact and you're listening and you want to go check it out, I did a little bit of a tour with the images that are in the show notes for last episode, but then you get my witty dialogue and banter with it. So go check out that video if you'd like. The whole thing with this is it's essentially one giant bed in the back. And there's ways to get underneath it. There's ways to get at the storage. But generally speaking, it's one gigantic bed. And the one thing that we learned very quickly was the mattress that I chose for this, which was essentially just a replacement situation where it was a bed or a mattress that I was looking to replace, which I have. And because I cut this into a whole bunch of different pieces, that is a little bit too thick. 6 inches, while insanely comfortable for a micro camper kind of setup, in a micro camper amount of space, too thick. So I basically cut it down to around 3 to 4 inches. And the reason why I say 3 to 4 inches is, like I said to the folks in the live show earlier, I used that amazing heated cutting tool and it was very slow. And then I realized if I just used a boning knife, a very sharp boning knife like you use for filleting fish, man, you could go a lot faster. I think the idea with cutting foam is, inexpensive, fast, looking good. Pick two. You get to pick two. So I chose inexpensive and fast for the with the knife situation, and I was able to cut it down. It is much easier. It can be rolled up a little bit more. There's a little bit more space in there for us to kind of lie down and not have to bang our hips at that kind of trunk junction. So I think that that's pretty good. I still think that I may consider splitting the mattress up into a couple of different pieces, just to kind of have a little bit of more maneuverability. But although tonight I just realized that it does roll at this thickness, so that might be something. The whole idea though is that it does need to be covered at some point. And I think I might use 2 fitted sheets, one on the bottom and one on the top, and I think that that'll actually work out pretty well. It's reminiscent of the mattress that we had in Kimberly's RV when we used to have that. So in terms of comfort level, it's great. I'd say it's very good. The loss of comfort was very minimal compared to the amount of extra clearance that we got. So that's really good. The space for our existence in there is a little bit more of an open question. When I first thought about this, I thought, there's going to be room to sit up in the back if somebody wanted to kind of like splay out a little bit. And the answer that I've discovered on that is not really. It's more kind of lounging, more like real reclined lounging kind of a thing. So that's one of the trade-offs that we have with all of this. You're not going to be able to be in the back while the other person is driving and doing anything other than being largely prone. I think you will be able to prop yourself up a little bit, especially at an angle. And that might be very comfortable. But the idea of there being kind of the ability to sit down and kind of lounge out, not quite exactly what I was really after. I think there's plenty of room for the dogs, which is going to be pretty amazing. The dogs have gotten very used to, and in fact demand in the Jeep, that we fold down the rear seat so that they have a huge platform for themselves to kind of be on. And the same is true now, except now they realize they have essentially a full-size bed and they can go all the way down into the trunk if they would like to. So they're super stoked about this whole thing. I think that as I'll talk about in a little bit, I still need to kind of suss out how things work when for different scenarios, like when when one person is up front, when one person is in the back, all of those different scenarios. And of course, in the camping scenario as well, when we're both sleeping in the back. Storage space is, I think, going to be okay, especially now that I've slimmed down that mattress. I think that I'll have more access to underneath the platform where the spare tire is. There's actually a lot of space there. So I think I'm going to put things like the tent and a few other things. And you're like, Tim, you've got a micro camper. Why are you going to bring a tent? just in case, just in case, to hold a campsite maybe while we go drive off. If it is just untenable to have 2 people plus 3 dogs in that space for comfort level, then I've got the tent. So those are some of the things that I'm going to do. I do think that the storage space is actually pretty good. The other thing that I wanted to mention from a storage perspective is I talked about the bike rack being a helpful thing. I think that the largest thing that we have that is hard to maneuver around is that dog stroller. And I just today figured out a way that it can be strapped down onto that bike rack very safely. So it's going to travel outside of the vehicle. And I think that's going to be a huge, huge benefit for us. We're also going to have most of our stuff for our day-to-day clothes and things like that be in rollerboard suitcases like you can fit above in an airplane. And those will go into the front seats when we're both in the back and sleeping. If it's just one person in the back, I think it'll be a little bit easier. They can kind of have a little bit more room to maneuver with all of that. So I do think that the storage space is pretty good. I think that it's a little compromised compared to where I would like it to be, but I think it's all right. The privacy dragon has been slain. I got 2 of, those kind of silvery sunshades that you put into the front of your vehicle to stop the sun from coming in. Well, I bought 2 of those. Both of them have black backs. And you do that for the winter. It helps to warm up your vehicle, which I never knew. But when you're trying to go for some privacy at night, and whether that's a Walmart parking lot, whether that is at a rest stop, a couple of different options that we've done in the past. The hardest part for me is I require no light. And unfortunately, lots of light comes in parking lots and things like that. Well, those 2 things on the front windshield and the rear windshield will black things out pretty well, almost completely. And then I've been experimenting with this black poster board for the side windows, and those work really, really well. I'm going to put in the show notes for this episode the beginning pictures to show how complete that really blacks things out. A lot of people do this to be super, super stealth, and they can even park in cities and things along those lines. Now, we're not going to be needing to do anything like that on this trip, but for purposes of experimentation, I thought I would like to get to that level of stealthness, and so that's great, and I'm really excited about the privacy levels that we're going to be able to have. What's left to do? I need to finish the side window covers, those things that I'm making out of the black poster board, and I have plenty of time to do that, even though I am really terrible at it. I do want to better assess the storage. And when I say assess the storage, I want to figure out what things that we're going to bring can go where. And in other words, there are some things that we need very low level access to, and those can go underneath the platforms. There are some things we're going to need to have relatively easy access to, not like while we're rolling kind of a thing, but that are easy when we pull off to go get gas or whatever, and those will go into different spaces. I need to kind of assess what those things are relative to the space that I've got. That's the kind of thing that I've got to do. I've got to start thinking about needs for the trip. I've thought about fans, I've thought about power and some other things like that. That's where my mindset is right now. And most importantly, and this is I already alluded to, I got to figure out the most likely travel and sleep modes. 2 people up front, 1 person up front, the other one in the back resting, 2 people sleeping in the camping situations, how the dogs fit into all of this, how the seat configurations will work. Do the seats slide way up? Do they slide way back, subject to the room that's there for the platform? These are all of the things that are left for this particular thing. So huge amount of work to do, but it's a lot of detail and not a lot of building that's left. In fact, I've screwed my last screw. I think what's left is basically kind of real minor construction. I want to move over into the chat room to kind of tie a ribbon on all this, because I noticed that Misha LeBlanc, a friend of the show here, said, what about putting a cargo rack on the trunk to keep aerodynamics in space? So Misha, that's a really good point. And that's effectively what's happening here. I'm going to be able to strap down either the camp chairs. I didn't mention the camp chairs, but we're going to probably bring 2 camp chairs, and also that stroller. They will effectively sort of be lashed to the bike rack, but they will bleed over onto the trunk. It should keep the aerodynamics reasonably good. That's the one thing that I will say about the LaCrosse, is that it is a very curvy aerodynamic vehicle. Sits very low, comically low, I will say. But I think that it will fit in there and work really well. The moonroof prevents the use of the roof for roof racks or roof bags or anything along those lines. But I do think that that's the right thing to do there as well. So, anyways, I wanted to say thank you all for your feedback and your interest in the micro camper. I will mention it again, but like I said, the micro camper is only tangentially related to bicycle touring, and I think that this is going to be a really interesting tool for bicycle touring, and I think that it's going to be something that might help me out with summer and indeed potentially fall tours, or at least options for them. And I wanted to transition now into talking a little bit more about my summer touring options. The micro camper may be a piece of all of that, although I'm not really sure. And I want to say, I want to start off by saying that I'm struggling a little bit, I would say. Maybe struggling is the wrong word here. But I'm trying to figure out, where do I want to go? What do I want to do? How do I want to ride for a summer tour? Obviously, the trip that I've been talking about here that's going to be out to the West Coast, bicycling will absolutely be involved. In fact, I know for a fact that you're going to get an episode of me cycling the Avenue of the Giants. You're absolutely going to get an episode on that because the bike's going to be with me, and the micro camper is a huge tool in how that's going to all work. And so that's a piece of all of that. But I'm struggling, and it's have you ever heard the phrase paradox of choice? I'll be fully vaccinated. It seems like that with the numbers likely trending down, things are going to be opening up. There's going to be a lot of options out there. And for the last year, I've been pining away for different types of tours that don't involve the C&O or the Gap. Sorry, C&O heads. Sorry, Gap heads. But I'm super excited not to be doing a tour on either of those trails, although I am going to be doing them probably at some point this year. What do? I put a lot of work in on that Pennsylvania route. I mean, what did I do? Did I do 4 episodes on that? I mean, thank you for putting up with that, by the way. But, the one thing I'll say about this part of the country, and that extends to Philly as well, and my Philly person in here and Harrisburg, I know we've gotten there. This part of the country gets very hot and very humid, and it's just not that comfortable to tour in. I do it every year, but sometimes in the summer, I like to try to escape the heat. The other thing that is a part of this particular route, that Pennsylvania Bike Route S, that I noticed, and I mentioned it on the pod, is that there's a ton of exposure. There's very little tree coverage for that ride. And I think that's another argument that I'm kind of convincing to myself that I am not going to be riding that one as my summer tour. I may look at that as a fall ride, maybe even a later fall ride, because I wouldn't mind doing that when it's cold, quite frankly, or at least not warm. I think I've decided that I'm going to table that one, as much work as I put into that one. But I am kind of excited to ride to Philly for some kind of a ride. It's nice, it's compact, it's short. The route was kind of cool. I love the idea of coming in on the Schuylkill River Trail. I love all of that. So I do think that that's something that's probably a fall or perhaps even a late fall ride, but something to be thinking about. The Oregon coast is clearly a front runner for me. Perhaps even the full Portland to San Francisco ride. And I know I talked about that on an earlier pod. All the COVID shows kind of run together for me. Maybe integrating in some fast forwards and things like that. But, for the summer, the one bummer about recent summers and climate change, quite frankly, is there is now a smoke season, even on the Oregon coast, certainly on the West Coast. So that's kind of a drag. I've ridden in it. It's not so enjoyable. I hope that there isn't a one. One other thing about Oregon and Northern California, I'll have just been out there. This micro camper trip is very much an Oregon and Northern California trip. In fact, it's especially going to be a coastal Northern California trip because we are going to be spending some time on the California coast, maybe a lot less on the Oregon coast. But, that argues against the kind of Northern California piece of it. I will say that I've also thought about digging into the archives for trip ideas. There have been many, many instances on this show where I have gotten all hot to trot about routes, and then you never hear from them again. I will say that one that has I'm revisiting just because I was up there very recently, right after I got my first shot. I went up to see my folks, and they live right on Lake Ontario. And I thought, oh yeah, I was going to ride around this thing at some point. So I think that might be an interesting ride. It got headwinds as an issue. You're not on the lake at all times. The route is fine. But I love the idea of circumnavigating it. I've got a past podcast talking all about that if you want to go check that out. There's a big question though. My friends north of the border may not want to let me in yet. Canada has still got things closed, so that's an open question as to whether or not I can travel into Canada at all. I want to make sure that Canada, you all are comfortable and have your stuff together before I put any pressure on that. Not that my presence or absence means a damn thing to international relations. But anyways, point being, that's a factor in all of this. There's also the possibility of just doing a trip on stateside, doing a Great Lakes kind of tour just on the U.S. side of things. That's certainly a possibility. I think that where I'm at with all of this, and I'm going to turn to the chat room in a moment here, because I'm sure I already see some things happening here. I know that a lot of you have different ideas as well. I think that I want this to be, I think I'm putting a little too much pressure on it. I don't know about the rest of you, but it's sort of like now as we start to do things for the first time after being off for a while, perhaps we're putting too much cachet into these things, and they have to be everything to us. And the first tour has to be the greatest tour of all time. And you know what? I don't think it needs to be. I don't want to overthink this. I don't want to underthink this. I want this to be fun first and foremost. And I do think that, more to come. Let's just put it that way. I'm definitely going to do a fall ride. I'm definitely going to do a winter ride. I'm definitely going to do a summer ride. So I do think that there are two more big, two tours, perhaps one larger one that's going to be closer to 2 weeks. And then the winter tour, I think I'm looking at Florida, but that's something that I'm going to be dealing with later. Turning to the chat here. Let's see. You are permitted not to do the Gap or the C&O, do Maine instead, says Misha. And Misha says that Canada is closed. Misha's from north of the border, if memory serves. Maine is an interesting one. I don't know much about what is available in Maine from a touring perspective. I do know, of course, the Atlantic route starts there. Beautiful, beautiful place. Certainly cooler. Who knows? That's I'll have to take a closer look at that. Thanks, Misha. I think that's a really good idea. All right, so that's it. I am excited about the prospects for the touring, and I will keep you obviously all apprised, because you hear from me literally every week about this kind of thing, and I will I'll keep you apprised. Next, we are going to do the Ask Me Anything segment here on the program. And I am looking forward to answering some of your questions here. I just wanted to start off by flipping through the chat box here to see. I feel like that there was somebody who had a question here in the live show. Here we go, Mark. So we're going to start off our first question here on the Ask Me Anything segment. By the way, I've been doing these for almost every single live show. So if you ever see me planning a live show, feel free to shoot me a question in advance if I'm dumb and don't say, hey, send me questions, because I almost always do these. Mark Spooner asks, planning my 7th group bike packing trip, camp in New York State parks for 3 to 4 days, thinking of Empire Trail, Buffalo to Oneida, or a Catskill Loop. Any thoughts or suggestions? Have I ever biked the Catskills? I have not. Although, as you alluded to, the Empire Trail includes a route up the Hudson River. So you're in the Hudson River Valley. So that's certainly would be a part of any Catskills loop that you could do. I hear it's great. I've known a bunch of people that have done some cycling in that area. It's very popular. A lot of folks from New York City will actually go up and cycle in those areas as well. I would say the Empire Trail is really, really fantastic. And of course, that includes the Erie Canal Trail, which I certainly have done, goes literally right through my hometown. So I have nothing but good things to say about that trail. I really like what New York State is doing. New York State has excellent state bike routes in addition to these trails. One thing that I do want to mention is that the word trail is in it, but there are going to be some on-road portions to it, just like the Erie Canal trail includes some on-road portions. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. They're very well shouldered. They're very well maintained. Yeah, I think that cycling in New York State is a really great option for you if you're doing it. I would. That's another one that I may consider doing, a longer tour up there, maybe as an alternate to the circumnavigation of Lake Ontario, maybe doing the Erie Canal again and maybe coming down the Hudson River Valley area or something along those lines. But yeah, New York State, I'm a big, well, I mean, obviously I'm a New York State native, but I think that from a bike touring perspective, New York offers a lot. New York offers you cities, small towns, rivers, lakes, mountains, all sorts of different things. It's huge. It's way, way, way more than New York City. And I think that, as I've talked about on the podcast before, cycling, bike touring, bike packing is a great way to get to know a state, a place. I feel like I knew Ohio very poorly. I didn't know Ohio much at all. And the fact that I cycled across it a couple of years back on the Ohio to Erie Trail, I feel like I understand Ohio a little bit more. I got to know it a little bit better. Missouri, the same way. I could fill up what I knew about Missouri in a thimble. But then I went on the Katy Trail and I learned a lot about the towns, met a lot of people. It was a really good way to get to know places that you're unfamiliar with. So whether you know New York State or not, it's a great way to get to know it, and it's pretty fantastic. All right, let's see. Hopefully that's helpful. Let's see. I saw a new question. Vince LaGreco. Nope, that's. Oh, here we go. What do I prefer? Butterfly bars, Jones H bars, or drop bars? Okay, well let's do this by process of elimination, Vince. Drop bars are out. They work for a lot of people. They don't work for me. I had, the classic kind of 10-speed setup when I was younger. And I liked getting down in that position very rarely, way down in that kind of arrow position. And so from a touring perspective, even riding on the hoods, just never struck me as super comfortable for me, how I ride, my physiology, etc. As I've gone the opposite of getting younger, over the course of 10 years of touring, I have found that my needs, I think, are changing. And that's when I'm going to get to the butterfly bars, which is what I have toured on almost exclusively, except for the first bike that I had, which unfortunately got stolen. And if you stole it and you're listening, hi. I think butterfly bars are great. Multiple hand positions. You really can have some comfort. You can really have some great options for yourself. Here's the thing. In the last year or so, I have noticed that I end every single day with a lot of neck pain. And I think that what I've been discovering is that when I ride the Brompton, I don't have that neck pain. And I'm realizing it's because of the position that I'm in, primarily when using the butterfly bars. It's down and I'm craning my neck up. Now, I could put some risers. This is showing my total ignorance. Spacers. I could put more spacers in there and raise up the bars a little bit more and ride a little more upright with that. Or I could potentially move over to those Jones bars or an H bar. That's where I'm starting to think I may be moving. Maybe not this year, maybe next year. But that's a direction I'm really looking at. I know Mysterious James is a huge fan of the Jones loop. And I think that I am going to have to start to convert into a little more upright riding position as a result of that. So that was very long, barking, interrupted answer to your question. I think that I am Jones bar curious, but I have been a butterfly bar guy for 10 years, quite literally. So All right. So let's see. Next question. Byron from Australia. Hills or no hills on your ride? Which do you prefer? This is a great question. So when I started bike touring, I feared hills. I think I've talked about this on the pod in the past. And I think fear is the right word. I practiced, I trained for that very first ride in Northern California. And I thought I was so set. My number one goal was not to be the last person. That was it. If I was the second or third to last person coming into camp at night, I would be okay. Well, it turned out I ended up being the last person a lot. And here's why. Because I trained here in the flats. And I talked to the husband of an old high school friend of mine who did the climate ride from New York to DC. And I said, before I went to California, I said, what's your one piece of advice? And he said, hills, do hills. And I thought to myself, oh, I'm sort of hosed because this was like a week or two before. And what I learned was that hills are a problem if you don't have the right gearing. And that bike was a great bike, except it was not properly geared for spinning up a hill. It was not a proper bicycle touring setup. And I learned very slowly and very painfully over time that you can replace things on your bicycle. You can replace the front setup, the rear setup. You can basically make it so that you can create a really, really spinny, very hill munching kind of setup with your gears. And I've done whole podcast episodes on that. So if you haven't heard the episodes that I've done before on gearing, I think I did a gearing for dummies, and I think I did a gearing follow-up podcast. Go check those out. If I haven't done those as a best of, look for them to become a best of very, very soon. Once I did that, I started to kind of like hills. Not like I seek them out kind of a thing, but what I stopped doing was feeling like hills were something to dread or something that was in my way. And I've gotten to the point where on some of the routes, the Oregon Coast route, for instance, one of my favorite parts of the Oregon Coast route is the Seven Devils, which is literally a series of 7 hills and a very big climb and a very big descent at the beginning and the end of it. And why is that? Well, I'm not dying trying to press up because my gears aren't low enough. I just kind of sit back and spin, and I take my time going up them. And even if I'm a fully loaded bike touring setup, riding heavy, I can do that with the bike that I've got. So I would take that. I would say that I don't fear them. I don't seek them out, but I definitely don't fear them. I do notice one thing, right? That Brian says, hills over wind any day. And that was going to be my next point. I think Brock Dittus, former host of the Sprocket podcast, once called, I believe he was the first person who ever said this, and he may be copying somebody else. I have no idea, but he called wind invisible hills. And it is so true. I hate wind so much that there are times when I'm like, I need to figure out a way to not have 2 side panniers so that I can cut through the wind a little bit better. That's been the thing that has gotten me more into the possibility of bike packing setups, to be perfectly honest. So that I think that's a fairly complete answer to your question. A lot of folks are chiming in on some of these other things about Jones bars and drops and things along those lines. Drop bars. No hills over wind any day. There you go. Mark, I have a Trek 520, a touring bike with gearing not suited for loading touring, ironically. Swapped out cluster and front gears immediately after purchase. Yeah, Mark, that is a really common thing. Even the bike that I have, the REI Safari, which is nominally was meant to be a touring bike, I found that it needed better gearing. And I think that there are very few bikes that will have what I would consider an optimized bike touring gearing setup for loaded touring. Ironically, perhaps I would say that mountain bike gearing is actually have really, really low gears. But why? Because they are built to go up big, steep hills. So sometimes those types of bikes, or perhaps the gravel specific bikes, there's a shout out to my Pathless Pedal people. Those perhaps are out of the box a little more on set up better for gearing, better gearing setup. All right, let's see. I am going to go to a couple of the Ask Me Anything questions that I have from email. And again, live folks, please feel free to throw your questions into the chat box here. You get pushed to the front of the line. Question from an anonymous listener. What's the status of the river crossing at White's Ferry on the C&O? Glad you asked, anonymous writer, inner listener person. Thanks for writing in. Loudoun County, Virginia, and Montgomery County, Maryland are doing a 90-day study. Let me back up for a moment here for those of you who don't know what this is. White's Ferry is a cable ferry crossing, the last of its kind, crossing the Potomac River at a very, very convenient point for bike tourists. It allows access to hotels on the Virginia side from where the trail is, the C&O on the Maryland side. It was closed last year because financial reasons and things that I won't go into too much. You can read more about it in the link in the show notes there. So the counties are getting involved right now. There's a new owner, and this new owner thought, dude, I'm just going to go in there and negotiate this with the Virginia people, and we're going to get this done. Well, it didn't happen. The Virginia side, they're stuck on stuff. They may be in the right. I haven't followed it closely enough to decide one way or the other. But the new owner, I think, was expecting that he would be able to get the Virginia folks, the Virginia landowners, to be able to play ball, and they haven't. So now, Loudoun County, Virginia, Montgomery County, Maryland, they're doing a 90-day study, because you know that when governments do studies, many things happen, right? No, not always. Well, it's a 90-day study. I got a link in the show notes on all of that. That dropped, I want to say a couple of days ago. So you got to figure that this thing is not going to get solved most likely in time for the summer touring season, because 90 days gets us, let's see, we're practically at the beginning of May. That's May, June, July. So we may have some kind of an outcome from the study at the beginning of August. I don't think that anybody should be banking on White's Ferry being open for the summer touring season. Is it possible that maybe by the fall it could happen? Maybe. Is it possible that maybe the governments could end up deciding to take it over, eminent domain, and operate it as a government related thing? Possibly. Who knows? I don't know, but I do know that the status is status quo for the moment. And that means if we're banking on getting a hotel on the Virginia side at that point, you're probably going to want to take a look at some of the alternatives that I talked about 4 or 5 podcasts ago. You can go check that out. Let's see. Next question and some of these, by the way, were questions from past couple of weeks that I have been less than responsive to on email. If you have an email, by the way, that you have sent to me and I have not responded, trust me, it is not personal. It is just my lack of ability to be an adult, essentially. Have you thought, this is from Paul Steckler, have you thought about devoting an episode to the literature of cycle touring? The answer is yes. And then I just can't pick a book. I don't know why I have not found a book about bicycle touring or a book about bike travel or bike packing or anything along those lines that has really caught my attention. There are a ton of books. There are a lot of self-published books, and I'm sure many of them are very good. I have picked up a few of them and started reading them, and I have not been super impressed. I don't know if I'm just picky or if I'm just not a huge reader. I'm a big audio book guy when it comes to this kind of stuff, but it's something that I'm interested in tackling. And Paul, in that same email, had suggested, hey, we could do like a book club thing on the pod, which I think would be really great. If any of you have got any kind of questions, or excuse me, any suggestions, knowing that I am picky, and don't take offense if I don't choose the book, please feel free to email them my way, pedalshift@pedalshift.net. I would like to do something like this in the future. So, Paul, thank you for that question. Let's see. Chad has a question, a touring adjacent question. What is your favorite episode of the Hit Parade podcast? Oh, man. Okay. let's talk about the Hit Parade podcast. It's, I think if I had a gun to the head, say, what's your favorite podcast? That's my favorite podcast. My favorite one, it was not the it was not the Taylor Swift one that just came out. No offense to you Swift heads. Just not the. I think that I'm generationally just not in the Taylor Swift frame of mind. I have to be honest. I really, really liked the one that they did where anytime they mention they have Nirvana in it. They did one recently and it was about the quirkiness of the charts around the holidays. I thought that was fascinating. And it talked about how back when Nevermind came out, how lots of people asked for that for Christmas apparently, and how that created a boomlet for the album around the holiday season, and also how there's like a delay in all of that, and how sometimes the charts don't reflect holiday sales until later into January. Really, really fascinating. Those are the kinds of episodes that I am kind of into. So that's the one that's off the top of my head. I am often surprised at the episodes of bands that I am not necessarily huge fans of, but I learned so much. And it's funny, Chad, you read my mind. The Bee Gees episode. What a fascinating episode that was. If you have not checked out the Hit Parade podcast, it's put out by Slate. Chris Melanphy is the host of it. He writes a column called Why Is This Song Number One on Slate, which is also a very good read. I just recently learned that he and I must be the same age and may have the same birthday. We certainly were born in the same 2-week period in September of 1971, because he revealed that in the chart terms, you kind of nerd out, what song was number one when you were born. He recently revealed that the song that was number one when he was born is the same terrible Donny Osmond song that was number one during when I was born. So he and I are very, very similar in age, and so have a lot of similar kind of points of view on music, I think. And I really appreciate his point of view. If you have never listened to it, I strongly urge you to check it out. It is excellent, 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 fascinating show. So yes, chat, thank you for that question. Let's see. Next question is, this was a good one. This came from listener Kev. You mentioned having trouble sleeping in a hammock while camping. If your issue is one of comfort and you're using regular gathered end hammocks, may I suggest a bridge hammock like the War Bonnet Ridge Runner? It's like the Cadillac of hammocks. He's listened to the show clearly to use that kind of a reference. It's better than a bed and the whole thing, and a tarp is easily bike packable. I have looked into it. I came very, very close to pulling the trigger, not on the War Bonnet, but on another one. There's 2 or 3 that are kind of similarly looked upon as really good. And I ended up kind of getting distracted and I never ended up getting it. I think that if I were to get more serious about hammock camping in a bike touring context, I think I would look at those that type of a hammock, the bridge hammock. If you don't know of these things, they are essentially lay flat. And they are very, very comfortable looking. They are a little more fiddly in the setup, from what I can tell, but not unreasonably so. And I think a lot better than the Hennessy's and the other gathered end hammocks that are out there. But Kev, thank you so much for that reference. And yes, I have thought about that. I've come very close. They're not that expensive. They're not that much more expensive than a decent tent. Oh, by the way, I bought a replacement. I've threatened this for years, but I bought a replacement. I bought another Alps Zephyr 2 tent, but I did not get the orange one. I was like, nope, I need this to be a little bit more stealthy. So I got the blue and gray one. So pour one out for the Zephyr 2 that has served me so well all these years. That will be probably coming with us to the West Coast. Let's see, just kind of checking in here. Oh, Vince says, I'm a hammock camper and use the Dutchware Chameleon. I think that's another one of those style. It's 11 feet and allows a flat lay on the diagonal. So yeah, they're very interesting. I think hammock people are very into being hammock people, and I like them. So far, I would say that I like them more for kind of lounging rather than sleeping, but I may give those a shot at some point. Let's see. If Hank O'Donnell, friend of the show, if I could suggest another route to explore, the canals along the Delaware River north of Philly. Both sides have bike trails, packed dirt/gravel for about 120 miles. It's fun to do a loop ride crossing the river to quaint, quiet riverfront towns. I think that sounds pretty good to me. I think that some combination of those trails with a Philly ride from either here or maybe from DC, that sounds pretty good. Thanks for the tip on all of that. I am also looking more into some more off-road riding. DC has had a spate of unfortunate deaths by vehicle of cyclists recently, and it's and pedestrians, and it's becoming a problem. It's been a problem, and we are a Vision Zero city allegedly, and we need to do better. We need to do a lot better. And I have to say, it's getting me to start thinking more about some more off-road riding, to be quite honest, because there's some great stuff out there. I do love riding on the roads. I don't think I'll ever completely go away from it, but I do have to say, yeah, it makes you think when somebody is doing everything right and they don't make it because somebody in a car screws up, and criminally so perhaps, and kills them. So food for thought. Anyways, boy, that got dark in a moment. That got dark there. Let's see. I wanted to. We're a little over an hour right now here from the live show perspective, so I think we're gonna start thinking about wrapping things up. I've got two more questions here that were via email. Again, folks in the live stream, please feel free to throw a question in there because you get first dibs because you're here live. Paraphrasing a question from Alex via email. Hey, wouldn't it be great if we had a good map resource that would better note how far off route you have gone to get to things, specifically lodging and campsites. I read that wrong. I think that's a really interesting idea. I would say that the ACA maps try to do that, the print ones. And when you're going along a route, it'll say, here's a camping option. It's 2.3 miles off of the route or something along those lines. That's about the best type of resource. ACA, by the way, Adventure Cycling Association. Sorry to speak in acronyms. It is a professional liability of mine because I am a lawyer and I talk in acronyms all the time. I think that they do a pretty decent job of that. Wouldn't it be great if there were apps that did that? Wouldn't it be great if there were other things that did it? Yes, and yes. Google Maps is certainly something. That's what I use for those types of things. If I am on a route and I'm like, oh, I need to find a hotel. I'll give you an example. Ohio. I was originally going to do a wild camp on my last night before going into Cincinnati, and it was getting cold, really cold, a couple of years ago, and it was May, but man, it was cold. And I decided, no, I think I want to see what my other options are. And I saw, there are hotels in the town that is the next town up. And it's really the last town before you start really getting into Cincinnati. And I was like, well, how far away is it from the trail? And it turned out it was only about a mile, and that wasn't too bad. Now, the one thing that I learned is it was a mile and it was up a gigantic hill, but it was fine. And I knew how far away it was, and I knew roughly what the route was, and Google Maps was the thing that connected me. So I would say, Alex, use resources like that as best you can. I think what you were after is something that was a little more bike touring specific, where wherever you were at any given point, you would be able to know where the closest types of resources are. I do think that things like Google Maps may be your best bet for that type of a thing, but until somebody maybe builds something that's more like that, I think that would be a really good thing. And I know the ACA is doing some digital stuff lately, and maybe they're going to be doing stuff like that down the line. Last but not least, from the email, paraphrasing another question from Ray Jackson, what about using a trailer for bike camping or bike packing? Lots of people use trailers. Friend of the show, Preston Page Piper, lives not terribly far from here in West Virginia. He used to do a trailer, and he, like so many people who get into bike touring, who start with trailers and carry a lot of stuff, very quickly go, you know what? I think I want to move to a pannier. And I think that the number one reason for that is trailers trailers get you to carry more stuff than you probably need, unless you're in an expedition style of thing, like a multi-month international kind of a thing where having a trailer can actually be a really helpful thing because you want to carry a lot of stuff. I think that the classic pannier situation, if you need to carry a lot of stuff but not that much stuff, is better. Also, trailers are tricky for uphills and downhills in a way that you don't realize until you switch to riding fully loaded with panniers and not on a trailer. It's just something that you would probably find a preference for away from a trailer. It's not to say that people don't have successful tours with trailers. Some people really prefer the trailer. I have a trailer, but I've literally never used it for touring. I bought it for touring, but I've used it for carrying stuff around town. I have comical pictures of how much stuff I put in that thing. That would end up on some blog in Portland, some bikey blog in Portland, because it's that comical. But yeah, I would say trailers are doable. But if it were me, I would look to other options other than trailers. So Ray, thank you for that question. Let's see. Vince, Byron in Australia says, I wish we had a canal or towpath trails here in Australia. The closest thing I found is riding the Murray River, but it is inland, very dry, and desert-like near it. Yeah, Australia gets hot, I hear. Whew. During your summers, man. Summer is summer, but you're about to go into winter, so maybe it'll be better then. Yeah, I hear, and I think it was you who said this, that it's tough. It's tough riding in Australia on the roads, especially in the backcountry there. Cody Orgill, I think I've mentioned him on the pod. He's done some really interesting videos on YouTube for his rides in Australia. Looks fun. I mean, like the people that you meet in these kind of like crazy backcountry bars or outback bars or whatever. Oh man, amazing. Sleeping at the rest stops and stuff like that looks fun, but it does look really, really challenging in Australia. Another country I would like to get to once we get to the other end of this whole COVID thing. That's a country on my list and has been for a while. Vince, I had a Bob branded trailer until I broke a rear spoke from carting too much. Yes, that's the thing. It's like you load those things up and you forget. Yes, they have spokes too, and those spokes can break. They're not built for that. Misha's building a tent trailer. I years ago did an episode of the pod, I think, where there was somebody who took essentially an old Bob trailer and used chloroplast, the signs, the material that political signs are made out of. They're plastic corrugated cardboard, for lack of a better way of putting it, and built a trailer with that, like a mini camper, a true bicycling micro camper, unlike the vehicular one that I'm building. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So Google that, Misha. You may find that that's kind of helpful there. Folks, I think that we are fresh out of questions, and I wanted to say thank you all for making this first live show of 2021 and the first live show in a year feel like coming home again. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you all for your questions. I appreciate you all for your participation and all of that. If I missed a question in there, I apologize. Feel free to shoot that question to me via email, pedalshift@pedalshift.net. If you're listening to the podcast, next week will be our best of show. I do not remember what it is, but I have figured out what it is. I just don't remember which one it is. It's good. It's a best of. It's fantastic. And then we've got some really, really fun shows coming up as we get into May and into June. It's all going to go back to bicycle touring. Lots more bicycle touring content coming at you very, very soon on the show. And as I start doing some more touring, of course, we're going to be bringing back more tour journals for you rather than just tour planning, which it feels like that's all I did over the course of the last year, plus a couple of rides on the C&O. But in any event, everybody, thank you so much for joining. Go check out the video on YouTube, and we'll see you next time. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Didis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Byron Patterson, Joachim Robert, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Dan Gebhardt, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemas, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latois Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Tom Bilch, Ronald Piroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lecco, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCulloch, John Hickman, Jack Smith, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Dave Fletcher, James Stratakis, David Neves, Mike Lazewski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponseller, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, and thanks also to all past and anonymous members for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.